This week, there was a courtroom full of COVID-safe plexiglass, which became the latest lens for us in America to view ourselves. Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is charged with second-degree murder in the death of George Floyd. A jury heard testimony, and America heard the pain of those who watched Floyd go unconscious under a police knee.
Did you make a 911 call?
That is correct. Did call the police on the police.
Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, the ingestion of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and the adrenaline flowing through his body.
Why did you feel the need to talk to Mr. Chauvin?
Because what I watched was wrong.
Floyd's death raises questions about police, about systemic racism, and about what leaders in Washington should or will do to address it. Wes, I want to start with you. You've spent years covering police, as I said, but also race and the Floyd family itself. I know you're part of a podcast, Run Tell This. We've talked a lot about what watching this is like. What has watching this been like for you as a Black man, as a journalist? And what do you think that this has told us about where the country is right now?
Sure. You know, I think we have to start by remembering how relatively rare the events that we are seeing currently are. That it is extremely rare for an on-duty police officer to face criminal charges after a death committed at their hands. It's even more rare for that case to then go to trial and not be pled out. And so this is a kind of a remarkable moment. We also know that this video was a real galvanizing moment for the country last summer. And this has been a remarkably emotional and difficult trial. We've seen person after person take the stand, and currently hearing the prosecutor's case, the defense will have their opportunity as well. But it's been this remarkable emotional series of testimony from people who believe they watched someone be murdered and who had no power to stop it. We hear from almost every person who's testified so far, from the paramedics to the people who were on the street showing up, who everyone around who was watching what was happening was saying, this is wrong, this needs to stop. Now, what actually happens in this case is going to be fascinating. It's going to be a test of our legal system. What we know is that historically juries are very hesitant to convict police officers, even in cases when there's video evidence such as this. I mean, I don't know how many folks have recently rewatched the Rodney King beating, but that video is pretty rough, and each of those officers walked. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what a jury is willing to do in this case. And it also raises, when we get to Washington, interesting questions as well. You know, there's been a lot of discussion. The House passed the George Floyd Act, for example. Nothing in that legislation would have actually stopped what happened to George Floyd. Policing remains a very difficult and complicated issue. It's something that's a local government issue. There are 18,000 police departments. And so I think there still is a big push and a pull between how much power the federal government wants to take to weigh in on this, and also still a big wedge issue as it relates to our politics, that not everyone thinks that there should be such scrutiny of police officers, and this remains a very sensitive issue for a lot of elected officials back home in their districts.
Anna, what do we know about the state of affairs at the Capitol? I know that most members of Congress actually do want to do something on this. However, big difference over, for example, should police be held liable in civil court over this. Where do negotiations between, say, Tim Scott on the Republican side and the Congressional Black Caucus stand? What are the chances for action in Congress?
Yeah, it's tough, like most things in Congress right now, when you look at the Democratic majority being 50-50 with +1 with the vice president's vote. So the House passed a bill on policing that would do a lot of the things that we've been talking about here tonight, that a lot of people feel are necessary, that it's long past time to actually get done. But in the Senate, that is stalled. They need to find 10 Republicans who are going to support that bill. I think that's a very steep hurdle. You do have Senator Tim Scott, who has his own legislation, has been behind the scenes talking with members of the CBC. So we'll have to see exactly if there can be any negotiation where there's maybe some kind of a compromise. At this point, it is postponed. There hasn't been any true movement and a sign that, yes, this is going to move forward.
Ayesha, President Biden pledged to have the backs of Black Americans, and he has credited them with his election. What exactly has he done so far, especially on policing reform and justice?
Well, he hasn't done much on policing. He had promised during the campaign to set up a commission on policing. There was a similar commission during the Obama administration, so already some on the left, some activists are concerned that a commission will be kicking it down the road. He has come out in favor of the George Floyd bill that passed the House and says, you know, he wants Congress to pass that. But a lot of the things, you know, as far as militarization of the police, there was supposed to be an executive order on that. That hasn't come through yet. He has done some things on the back end when it comes to private prisons, but that's also something that's not immediate because contracts are ongoing and it doesn't affect that. It affects future contracts. And so that's what he's done so far, which is not a lot. A lot of his focus right now has been on infrastructure and these other issues, kind of bread and butter issues, not necessarily criminal justice reform. What he has done is he has appointed a lot of people at the Justice Department who are known to be very active in these areas, and there's a thought that they would be able to maybe make some movement on the Justice Department's role. But as Wes said, this is really a local issue, so it's hard for the federal government to when it comes to policing.
Jonathan Martin, we also at the same time have an uproar in this country, divide over election law. And even today, we saw Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game out of Georgia because out of protest for the voting rights law that, you know, activists say that's voter suppression against people of color, but Republicans are furious. They say it's an overreaction. They're railing against corporate America. My question to you, is this a temporary moment or is this the new culture war?
No, I think that this is here to stay. And I think that President Trump may have left office, but I think Trumpism remains alive and well in American politics. These deep cultural divides, questions of which side are you on, have not abated. And I think that is going to be the way of the future. I would just say, Lisa, you allude to this on Biden, as did Ayesha. He's determined to stay on task. He wanted to focus on COVID relief and the big stimulus package out of the gates, and now, by gosh, he wants to turn to this big push on infrastructure, and whether it's voting rights or immigration or gun control or policing, you know, other issues that obviously the sort of, you know, activist wing of the Democratic Party is really eager to make progress on. You know, he does not have the same level of urgency because of his own approach. And I would just say, finally, on the policing issue, keep an eye on the crime rates, because I think, you know, a murder in this country, a violent crime surging at this point could reshape this conversation going forward.
Anna, briefly, what do you make of Biden's relationship with people who are not white or black? We've seen his numbers going down with Hispanics, and obviously Asian Americans have protested what they see as a real lack of representation on his cabinet. Does Biden have a political problem there with other people of color?
I mean, I think when you look at Hispanic and Latinos, certainly there is concern among Democrats going into the midterms and even to the next presidential cycle, because he did so poorly with them as voters. And when you look at some of their key issues, clearly immigration reform going to be one of the biggest issues that they are looking for some resolution. And not only just in terms of Dreamers, but what's happening at the border right now. And Republicans are really using that as a culture war. And I don't think they're going to stop that. And right now, the Biden administration does not have a good answer for how to stem this flow of mass immigration into this country and the children separated from their families. This is going to be something that this administration is going to have to deal with.
Wes, I'm sorry we have just a minute left, but I want to end this where we began with this trial in Minneapolis. What's at stake with this verdict here in about a minute?
Well, you know, again, the verdict could go either way. We've seen a very strong prosecution case, a very compelling, emotionally prosecution case, but the defense is still going to have its say, and there are big hurdles. And this is going to be another moment, another question. I think a lot of people out there were upset by the video that they saw, and I think there is a risk of investing a lot in which way this verdict goes, one way or the other, and it really could go either way, and I think we're going to be back at this moment again.